So I'm going to share an image with you, and I want you to close your eyes and just to picture this. It is 1904. A missionary photographer named Alice Seeley Harris takes a photograph in the Belgian Congo. In it, you see an African man named Nsala. He's sitting on the ground and he's staring at two small objects in front of him: a severed hand and a severed foot. These belong to his 5-year-old daughter, Bowali. She has been killed, cooked, and eaten by the armed guards of the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company because the village's rubber quota was not ready when the guards arrived that morning. They arrived early, and Bowali paid for it. Now, this image exists. This photograph exists. But I want you to picture it in your mind. Because when I talk about grooming by the grotesque, what do I mean by the grotesque? This is what I mean. This grotesque nature is not just held by King Leopold. It's not just held by the guards. The thing underneath it that allows it to exist in a society, that allows this type of behavior to become normal and the status quo, this type of behavior that doesn't enrage people when they hear and know about it. This is the grotesque. I'm Candace DeMeza, and I'm an African-American and Haitian multidisciplinary artist, ritualist, and liberation practitioner. And my work lives at the intersection of African cosmology, ancestral memory, speculative liberation, grief work, and the fundamental question of what it really takes to get free. I've been called an archaeologist of the soul, and I take that very seriously. You're listening to Afro Esoterica, my Substack, and this is my series, Composting Whiteness, a podcast series that asks us, what is whiteness really? Where did it come from? Who does it serve? And how do we break it down into something that the earth can actually use and deconstruct it so we can build something more fertile in its place? If you haven't heard episode 1, I think you definitely need to go back and start there. But if you are ready, let's go. So this episode, I want to get into some metaphor. Now, most of us know about cordyceps from the show The Last of Us, which I have not seen, but I've heard. But cordyceps is a very interesting species, and I think that it's interesting for us to look at and look towards the ecological world for a lot of different understandings of relational dynamics. When we look at it from a ecological standpoint, there's a very clear parallel here. So it is called Ophiocordyceps unilaterus. And really what it's called is the zombie ant fungus. And it's a parasitic fungus that infects carpenter ants. And here's what it does, step by step. Step 1. There's this invisible invasion because the fungus enters the ants through the spores. And once inside, it spreads through the body like fine threads. And then this infected ant appears perfectly normal. It goes about its work, and the colony cannot detect that anything has occurred. This fungus that has invaded this ant is in this ant, and this ant is walking through society with complete immunity. The society that would normally eject sick ants from the colony, it's unable to be detected because the ant looks healthy. Metaphor. Step 2. The fungus begins to alter the ant's internal rhythm. So it changes its foraging behavior. It's changing its relationship to humidity. It's changing its relationship to light. And then the ant starts leaving the nest at abnormal times. It's walking erratically and it's not following the colony's like trails, right? The pheromone trails that they normally leave that tell the ants where to go. It's not following these anymore. It's being redirected, but it's not by its own will. It's being redirected because the very fungus in it is producing things inside of its body that target its nervous system and its muscle fibers at precisely the right moment. At the moment when it's most optimal for the fungus to reproduce itself, it will move the ant from inside the ant's own body to the highest point where this ant now will grab onto a stem or bite down on a leaf vein with a lot of power so that it can't let go. It'll latch itself on and it will die there. It will die there, having latched on for dear life with all of its muscles seized up. And then, days after this ant's death, the stalk from the fungus will burst through the ant's head and release spores to infect an entirely new colony. And that body, that ant's corpse, has become the launch pad for the fungus's next generation. And what's interesting is that the fungus doesn't destroy the ant's brain. It leaves it intact. And what it does is it needs the host alive to do its work. It needs its functions. It needs to be able to move through the society, through the colony, through the world. And it needs to be able to do so undetected. And even yet, while this ant looks like the other ants, what this ant is really doing is posing a danger to the colony because the ant will move to the place where the fungus has the most optimum chance of reproduction. Everyone in that colony is unsafe so long as an ant is infected by the cordyceps. And the worst part is that it looks undetectable. This is how whiteness functions. And this is what is happening and occurring to you with the grooming by the grotesque. The grooming by the grotesque has you moving through society being able to be undetected, infected with something that is taking over the very nature of your ability to intellectualize and understand the world, your ability to empathize with human beings, the very lens through which you even view the world that you think is yours. You think you're operating by free will, and you do not understand that you are using an infected system that is also using you to make sure that it can replicate itself. And the worst part is that again, all of the language around this says that this is privilege and supremacy. And what I'm positioning here is that the fungus that has infected you doesn't leave you any safer. Because when it is done with you, it will discard your body on the front lines of wars that it fights ad nauseum over resources it will never give you should you make it back from war. While you do its bidding, while you move through the society and refuse to give up anything to continue the status quo, you don't know that the status quo is eating your children, saying that they taste like cream cheese. It's giving your daughters an inheritance of gender violence, refusing even in the United States to codify the rights of women within the Constitution itself. It will legislate the bodies of your daughters to determine whether they should even have access to it for themselves. As it abuses them, it will turn and weaponize that abuse against them. No one is left untouched by the cordyceps. The difference is that part of the cordyceps of whiteness's function within you is to always look out and never be able to see what's happening within. If it can disconnect you from your own body through trauma, through fear of the grotesque, you know, is lurking around every corner in every conversation. If it can keep you focusing out there at the trees, it can walk you without you ever realizing, I do not have control over my belief systems here. Why am I struggling to feel empathy? Why am I intellectualizing this? Why am I afraid to confront the grotesque when I hear it spoken casually? Why can't I recognize the status quo as violent? What am I afraid of and what will I lose that has me so quiet and stifled in myself? I want to shift a little bit into the naming of the grotesque and some of the lineage of where this comes from. I'm not the only person to create um, new naming conventions around these, to get to attempt through our English colonized language to get to the core of some of the dynamics that we're experiencing on the spiritual and the material planes. Dr. Marimba Ani has done a massive amount of work in her book Yorugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. And what she does is something radical, which is she looks at European culture and thought outside of using European analytical frameworks, right? Because how are you using the grooming by the grotesque, a brain and a system that has been completely infected with this cordyceps of whiteness, right? To serve and bolster, essentially, is an empire, the siphoning of resources from the masses, siphoning of resources from the earth to consolidate it by a few at the top. And the way that this is consolidated at the top is understood through race and patriarchy most profoundly. That even the ways in which we experience whiteness and white supremacy, which is really a supremacy of grotesque behavior, is also through patriarchy, right? Also in the ways that we conceive of God, the ways in which we conceive of humans' place in the cosmos, all of these are determined by a patriarchy. And this cordyceps, what's the function of this cordyceps? The function at large is to completely co opt your ability, your connection to your body, your ability to discern, your ability to know in the world, and even the ability of your spirit to be siphoned so you will do the labor as a worker ant to transfer the resources, to transfer resources on their behalf. So whiteness acts as an ant colony for you to transfer resources and be the social, right? To be the social face, the social policing arm of race, which says take from Black folks, reinforces the society's hierarchy from Black folks and Indigenous folks, people of color, people of global majority, to take those resources and move them. And you can have a crumb. The crumb that you can hold from carrying this is what you can have. But what you have sacrificed for this allegiance is the very autonomy over your own body, your own thought, your own words, your own language, your own beliefs, your own knowings, your own sense of self, your own identity, the names you know yourself to be, the ancestors whose names you can't claim. All of that has been funneled in here. And what you will give up is horrendous. You will sprout a fungus that will infect your very children and lead them to the slaughter. as it has happened in Europe amongst the empire itself, with the initiation of feudalism, that right, the creation of these classes, these peasantries. This is the codification of race in a different form. This is that prior experimentation with codifying what it means to be human at large, and who gets to take up more space, who gets to occupy the fullness of what it is to be human, being directly tied to your ability and capacity to exploit at large, to consume with impunity at large, to act as a cordyceps of infection. And those with greater influence get to be on the hierarchy. So, for this very reason, you cannot use a sick mind to understand a sickness. So then Dr. Marimba Ani comes in with a very clear understanding that in order for us to really look at European cultural thought and these patterns, we need to go to indigenous African systems and epistemologies to understand this that is acting as a foreign substance here in the programming of the mind, not just in those racialized as white, but in the colonial subjects, those who are subjected to proximity to those infected by cordyceps. So she has three concepts in this book, and I highly encourage you to go and get this book. But there's the acili, and this is a seed, right? This is the germinating part of the culture, the growing part, the essence of it, like the core logic of it. It's the very DNA, the seed, the acili. And there's the utamawazo, the culturally structured thought that flows from the acili, right? This is the ways that we come to know things about the civilization's view, its cosmology, right? This is the patterning, and the utama rojo is the energetic force, the emotional energy that drives the collective behavior of the members of a society. Um, and this is what it's that which gives the pattern, right? This is what's giving that cognition, the way that we're understanding the society. This is giving it its movement, right? Its action, its impetus. And Ani's fundamental argument is that the Asili, the actual seed of European cultural society and thought, is domination. It's domination. That this is the intentional, this is what it is at its root. It is domination. And that all of the ways that it has functioned to create hierarchy, to create separation, to create control, are all to function as a form of domination. These are the architecture, these are the building blocks of how it's allowed to extract. And going further, I would say that where did this domination and these binary forms that help to make us easily controlled, this or that, collapsing unlimited possibilities. This is some of my own grappling, right? Through the Dagara Elder Malidoma Somé and the concept of Ajay, the unlimited possibility realm that we exist within, is the the origin of patriarchy. Patriarchy, this storm god of light that comes down from the mountain somewhere to a people that many archaeologists or anthropologists call the battle axe cultures, a warmongering culture, bring down a war god who's the god of the storm, also known as the father of lights, from somewhere off a mountain. And it makes war, but very specifically, it makes war on women and that which is considered the dark. The binary jumps in here, the polarizing nature, right? The light and the dark. But more than just a superficial construct, what this seems to be at its very nature is, I position there's a war against fertility. The Yoruba concept of Ajay that Teresa N. Washington talks about in our mothers, I need to get the exact name, but Teresa and Washington talks about the Aj, and the understanding of the Aj is like the primordial power of creation itself. And that this entity, whatever got a hold of these people, this battle axe cultures, the initiation of this cordyceps, this co-opting that has spurned from its binary thinking, from its dominating nature and its need to dominate fertility, domination of the earth, domination of the womb, domination of the spiritual womb, right? Which is another place of creativity and fertility, right? It's not about human reproduction at large. This is about the very nature of unlimited possibility that seems to be innate in peoples of the global majority and gets codified somewhere with darkness, the dark womb, right? The womb as a place of darkness. So we make war on the womb. We make war on even the cosmological understanding of our cosmos as a womb from which things are birthed, right? We make war on, prior to the institution of patriarchy, a understanding of a divine ancestress, the understanding that even our DNA, our species is coded to have some kind of allegiance and connectivity to the womb that carries us forward. That DNA is matrilineal in and of itself because mitochondrial DNA continues to remain intact and passed down. Societies were organized around these very basic principles. We know today that all fetuses are female before turning male. These are just biological fundamentals. So the understanding that there was a goddess or goddess concept or a birthing process that is happening in the larger cosmos around our cosmic origins, and the earth as a representation of another entity that births, and then the what we call woman, which is, again, these are some white supremacist whiteness terms that are very fraught, and we'll continue on with understanding of that and how gender functions within whiteness. But right now we're saying woman, but just the nature of reproduction within the human body via the uterus being another aspect and representation of this principle. Those within our societies, where many indigenous societies around the world understood that artists and artisans were peoples, sacred peoples channeling from the divine, from the unseen, that this was a creativity. This could be a manifestation of the Aj, right? Understood queer people as gatekeepers of this energy that isn't directly codified only to the uterus, but is wombic in the sense that the womb as a technology, as a place, a fertile ground for creation. So when women are birthing, this is a wombic technology. When people are creating song and dance and telling story, right? The dagger consider all art to be a sacred healing practice. This is a mineral practice, is considered in the bones. Why in the bones? Because the DNA is in the bones. Why is the DNA important? Because the DNA is how our mothers, how the uterus and the womb, the spiritual power that backs the uterus, is codifying memory. This patriarchal God, this institution of a new cosmology comes, and it says, I want to collapse all that is fertile and harness the power of this fertility because it doesn't have its own. It needs a host. It cannot create and replicate itself for itself. So it needs a host, and it needs a fertile host. Here we have the introduction of a cordyceps, the introduction of a thought form, a spiritual entity, as many indigenous African scholars understand, indigenous African spiritual practitioners understand, that more than just the physical materialism of the world is the spiritual backing, what's happening in the unseen. So, what we see as material structure, there's a spiritual infrastructure, perhaps entity attached to needing to replicate itself through the human vessel because of our propensity for fertility, for creativity. The necessity for it to co opt us so that it can spread. And spread it did. And spread it did. It spread so far, it has codified itself into caste, class, race, gender, all hierarchies, all serving the purpose of domination. For what? For extraction. Domination of the land itself. Again, you can look at the writing, the Manifest Destiny text written in 1851 by John O'Sullivan. And you can see that the vision for the westward expansion is very much codified to a domination, to a need and a desire to extract the land itself, which it calls a she and says that it is fair and fertile. And the way that this white supremacist, the way that this grotesque cordyceps operates, is it treats women like it treats the earth. It treats all fertile peoples like it treats the earth. Just something to dominate so you can be extracted from. And eventually, when it no longer needs access to your body, to your thoughts, to your spirit, to your ability to replicate, to reproduce, not just through the body, but through the very fact that what we give our attention to multiplies. So, what does it do with this technology? This cordyceps makes sure that we give our attention to exactly what it wants to replicate in the world. And that is what we see, and that is what we will focus on, and that is what we will create. And then, when we come to the very fulfilled conclusion where there is death and fracture, then what we have is a population of people, those racialized as white, who will then ask what has happened as they look at all of the bodies of ants with spores overflowing them. Will say, well, we did not see it. We could not see them in our communities. We could not see them. But the reason that this cordyceps is allowed to go unchecked is because when you see your fellow ants, your fellow people acting in ways that should be alarming, you ignored it. When you hear evidence that there is sickness, the racially coded jokes, what are called microaggressions, but are really macro manifestations of unspoken violence in the society. When you enter into rooms and places and you hear and know the things that are being said and spoken, you know the things that are being done in your own families, you know the conversations you participate in and are silent about, then you cannot wonder how this cordyceps has been allowed to continue. You have been groomed by the grotesque. You have been groomed by the grotesque. And it has numbed you so much that not only does Black Death entice you as the impetus for trying to discover, but you will completely ignore the white death that's constantly around you. You'll ignore even within you the destruction of your own sense of self and well being, the sense of feeling home within you. So, what I'm describing essentially is the acili in action. This is the germinating part. This is the spread. This thought form that we're tracking back to battle axe cultures and the institution of some new cosmology that all of a sudden decided that it's a war god and it must make war first on the goddess. It must make war on the fertile principle, which involves human fertility of all kinds, whether that's reproduction, whether that's art and artistry, whether those are the spiritualists. It must destroy all of them and co opt that ability for itself and consolidate that extraction into empires. Then those empires spread through domination to conquer more land, more people to build its spiritual empire and its physical empire. More ants infected by a cordyceps who will shift and carry the wealth from their peoples of origin, the wealth from other peoples as well, and bring them to empire in exchange for crumbs, just to be co opted and eventually die at the hands of the very empire that they were forced in servitude to. Because at the very core, what we're dealing with is not just a physical cordyceps, it's a spiritual one, it's an unseen one, because it infects our very brain and ability to conceive of ourselves. Everywhere that the empire spread through terror, first in Europe itself, against the tribes and clans of Europe, into India, into Africa, the creation of the New World. This cordyceps spreads, and terror and fear are some of the easiest ways for it to hijack our mainframe. So let's talk about some of the things that the empire did. So Columbus, let's talk about Columbus. And this is the Asili, right? Dr. Marimba Ani calls this the Asili. This is the very root of the cultural thought, which we've already decided and determined very clearly is domination. And I add in domination for the purpose of extracting the fertility, because I believe that at its core, what we're dealing with, that we're calling white supremacy, we can call misogyny, patriarchy, is an infertile principle. It's a principle of sterility that needs a host. It cannot spread on its own. It needs a host. It needs us to continue it. So how does it spread? Well, we have Columbus, his bitch ass. Christopher fucking Columbus. Christopher Syphilis Columbus, who will arrive in what we know today as Haiti and the Dominican Republic, Haiti. He will encounter the Taino people, a beautiful people, sophisticated architecture and agriculture, spiritual practice. Within 30 years, decimate the population of them. Columbus imposes a tribute system requiring every person over 14 who live near gold mines to deliver a quota of gold each month. Those who meet the quota they got to wear copper tokens around their necks, and those who didn't, their hands were cut off. When gold was scarce and labor was extracted through enslavement, then Columbus himself sent more than 5,000 enslaved indigenous people across the Atlantic, more than any individual of his era. And the population of Hispaniola, Haiti, estimated between 300,000 and 8 million in 1492, had been reduced to 32,000 by 1514. By 1542, only 200 remained. By 1555, none. I don't think it's none, but essentially the population is entirely decimated. This was the enslavement that Columbus brought to the native peoples of Haiti, where present-day Haiti and Dominican Republic are. Bartolome de las Casas, a priest who witnessed it, recorded what he saw, and what he saw were soldiers making bets about who could slice a man into with one blow. Children torn from their mothers and dashed against rocks. People burned alive in groups of 13 in honor of Christ and the 12 apostles. If this doesn't tell you something profound about the nature of patriarchy and its relationship to Christianity and a war god who's also very jealous and spent an entire portion of its seminal text making war against the peoples it encounters in the service of creating a homeland for the people who are driven like cordyceps through wilderness. What we're dealing with this cordyceps again is not just a physical domination. It is a at its very core spiritual domination. It's a domination of the entirety of a worldview. It tells you what God exists, how you should conceive of this God. It's the reason why it feels so discomforting to conceive of a God that could be a different racial background or ethnic color than you, why God is a particular gender, what pronouns feel most comfortable to use them. And even when we keep the same religion associated with patriarchy and its spread and domination, because we know that empire has spread through the domination of patriarchal religions. We see the same lineage, although the words get changed. The same systems become rife with domination and extraction, naming slave ships after prophets in the Bible, wealthy slave owners writing some of our most famous hymns and spirituals. If we look at the art, this is where Auguste Boal comes in with Theater of the Oppressed. If we look at the function of art and philosophers and thinking, especially from Europe, what we see are a lot of cultural forms that act as enticing cordyceps, subtle ways that we become in service to empire, affixing our identities to empire in ways that seem warm, replacing our desire for belonging with the love of our good father, whether that good father lives in the sky or within us, or that good father takes on the role of the nation state. Bequeaths to us a new identity, often giving us new names to supplement for all that we have lost to its domination, a long trail of, of ant bodies full of cordyceps as they walk to their own destruction, losing their autonomy, losing their place in their colonies, destroying the very homes and clans and tribes and knowledge systems that they came from, destroying their relationships to their own bodies, to their own minds, to their own selves, being betrayed from the inside out. But with all this loss and no ability to grieve, what we will take in instead is crumbs, as long as they make us feel like we have a belonging and a homeland. So we will take Captain America. We'll love that representation. We'll feel moved by the patriotism. We'll sing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. We'll feel the nostalgia in spite of the fact that this man was a known slave owner, which is to say a human trafficker. But we will say, no, let that cordyceps in because it feels like home. This is the grooming by the grotesque that so thoroughly co-opts our autonomy and sovereignty that we will willingly participate in the mythologies that don't serve us while rejecting the mythologies that do. We'll say it's not that deep. It's really not that deep. As that cordyceps is walking us to its highest point, and as we grip on and latch on with all of our might onto every vestige of a lie, of the nobility of the state or government, or attached to every lie that we've been told about who we are within the world, who is allowed, who's not allowed to be inheritors of this world, who is and who is not human, and how much space they get to take up. We'll grip on with everything we have, and we won't realize that this grip is a death grip. So the question then becomes, what will we do with the bodies? What will we do with what we know about the grotesque? What will we do with the places in us that we have allegiance to the grotesque? Because this is the homelessness. When the cordyceps has forced us away from the colonies and destroyed our colonies, what we receive is a fractured humanity, an empathy deficiency, and a deep need for belonging, and an even deeper desire to be free. And when you recognize that the grotesque, white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, the modern nation state itself only wants you to live or die based on which one is more beneficial to its ability to extract from you. Your life force, your attention, your ability to create the world, because you will speak it and act it and live it into being. You will reinforce it. You will carry its crumbs. You will do its work. You will do its bidding in the places it cannot reach. You will collapse all of your unlimited potentialities and those around you into something binary that can be easily controlled by something that cannot handle. You'll reject and grab on to gods that it chooses for you while being blind to the ones that it doesn't even want you to know about. When you recognize that there is a sickness, the question becomes, now are you willing to fight with everything in you against the cordyceps within you? There was never any need to be trying to save something outside of yourself when the very root of all of this is that it cannot continue without using us as hosts. And this grotesque is infecting everyone. Black, brown, indigenous, racialized as white. It's using us all differently and at different levels of the hierarchy and with different costs. But all of us are being used and need to be in remission. And I love that ambulance sound. So what Composting Whiteness is asking you is, do you want to be the infrastructure for the grotesque, or do you want to excavate the spore? Do you want to identify the very chemical compounds of it that have been modifying your behavior and begin to actually move towards the long work of rebuilding a nervous system that can feel its own humanity again? That is not guilt work. That is liberation work. And it's got to start in the body. Can't wait to join you for the next episode of Composting Whiteness. I would love your comments. What's coming up for you? What are you working through? This is an emergence practice. This has nothing to do with perfectionism, but it does involve, we have to take this work very seriously.